friends, this is part 2 of the Degloved finger videos. In this video I'm going to show you how I create the skin part of the finger that's been completely removed. First of all, I'm going to use a skin safe silicone to create the mold of my finger. I'm going to use pinky seal for this, and you measure out equal parts of A and B, either by weight or by side. I'm doing side because I'm doing the lazy man's version. You want to make sure that you mix both A and B together very well. And also there's different things to know about silicone. If you're not aware of how to use silicone, read the instructions basically before you start, and be aware of what can inhibit the cure. Now it's going to be quite runny at first, so I'm going to put the initial layer over my finger and just getting it into all the nooks and crannies and lines, just to try and get all of that detail in there. After about a minute it's starting to thicken up, so I'm going to put another layer over the finger and just try to coat it as evenly as I can. And now that it's thick enough to hold on, I can put the rest of the silicone over the finger. I'm going to try and build it up as thick as I can and as even as I can around the whole finger, and just be really careful not to take off any of the silicone that you've already done, and that there's no parts that are overly thin. So after about 10 minutes it's cured enough to take off. I'm going to start by loosening the bottom, but there is quite a grip on my finger, so I'm going to use my spatula just to kind of break the seal, the suction on it, and help to get it off my finger. Now I've got my mold ready. I'm going to prepare my gelatin, which is what I'm going to make the fingers out of. So this is homemade gelatin. I will link a video of the recipe that I used by another YouTuber called Stuart Bray, so you can make your own, and I'll link where you can buy it pre-made in the comments as well. I'm going to add grease paints and a red and a blue flocking to try and colour this gelatin. So I'm adding a bit more grease paint because it's a bit light still, and I've added both red and blue because I want the finger to look red like my own hand, but also blue because its blood supply has been cut off, so I want it to be slightly paler and slightly bluer than my own hand. So it's obvious that the blood flow has been cut off and it's almost a dead finger. So now I'm carefully going to pour the hot gelatin into the finger mold. I'm going to swirl it around and pour it out the excess, and this will give the initial layer of all the details. And then I'm going to pour a second layer in. Now the gelatin's cooled a tiny bit, and again swish it around and pour it out. And this will give me basically the skin of the finger. And as the gelatin's cooling, I'm going to swirl it around so it doesn't just all settle into one end of the finger. And then when I was relatively happy with it seeming like it was cool enough to maintain its shape, I put it into the freezer and left it there for about 20 minutes to completely harden up. Now to take it out of the mold is a bit difficult because the edges are going to be very thin and you can risk ripping apart the gelatin, but I think finger mold isn't very thick silicone, so you can kind of unravel it and fold it down because it is quite flexible, so that you can get the finger out unharmed. And you notice that the middle of the finger has stuck together because it's hollow and because the gelatin will stick to itself if it's unpowdered. So I'm going to gently pry apart the inside and powder it so that we can paint the finger more easily, and then I'm going to re-stick it down at the end. So I'm using Nye Neutral Set Powder, but any kind of translucent powder, baby powder, anything will help the gelatin to not stick to itself. And I'm just going to use my spatula to gently pry it apart so that I don't rip the gelatin. And you can keep it stuck together and paint it as is if you like. I just thought that it would be easier to paint it this way. So now I've got my powdered, unpainted gelatin. I'm using my Skin Illustrator Light Fleshtones palette and my FX palette to paint this. So first of all, I'm going to add pinks. This is the main thing that's going to bring it to life because right now it's very pale. So I'm mixing both the coral adjuster and the rose adjuster, and I'm placing it mainly on the joints where the deepest wrinkles are and around the tip around the fingernail, because that's where it's reddest on my own fingernails. Now I'm going in with a stipple brush and I'm painting some of the natural 2 skin colour to make it the skin colour a bit deeper on the finger as it's very pale. And I'm going to go in with the blues. I'm going to create, mostly I'm using blues for shadows. So I'm going to, and also to make it look a little bit deader and obviously no blood supply. So I'm painting blues around the fingernail and the fingertip and into all of the creases as well. Looking at my own fingernails, they were a bit blue and a bit purple, so I'm going in with the blue there, and I'm using it to create the shadows in the deepest parts of the wrinkles. I'm just going to stipple blue over the whole finger to give it a bit of a deadish look. I'm going to use the purple, which is a bruise tone from the SFX palette. I'm going to use it to deepen up the fingernail and create shadows in there and give it some definition from the rest of the finger. And again, I'm going to go into the wrinkles around the knuckles. I'm using a very fine brush for this just to get it right in the details. And also, you'll notice I'm using my finger a lot to pat off any excess, and that will kind of keep the colour in the deepest recesses but take it off the rest of the finger. Now I'm going back over it again with some more reds, with some more pinks, because it's still very pale and doesn't look like it came from the same hand. So I want it to be not as pink as my hand, but it still needs to be pinker than what it currently is. So again, I'm focusing a lot of it in blotches, basically, because my skin is quite blotchy. So I'm just patting it around the nail with the brush and with my fingers to create a very uneven, blotchy skin colouring. And I'm going to go in with the lighter tones. I'm going to do a little bit of highlighting around the nail because my nail's got a little bit of the whites around it, as you can see, so I'm trying to copy that detail. And I'm going to use some of that ivory white just to create like a blotchy white colour over the whole finger as well. And just usually kind of using the brush and my finger to pat it on. The finger tapping works really well actually for getting a realistic skin tone. And I'm going to go back in with a bit more blue and a bit more purple, and so that's the vein blue and the bruised tone mixed together to create a shadow colour. And just go back in and redefine those areas. And you'll notice if you look at your own hands, the areas in the creases where the knuckles bend, you can see the veins a little bit more clearly because the area is quite thin. And so this colour also helps to kind of look like you're seeing the veins through the finger at these thin areas of skin too on the back of the finger. And creating that shadow. Now to create the fleshy inside of the finger, I'm going to start off with the Rose Adjuster colour. Just paint a light pink colour over all of it. And bringing it onto the outside a tiny bit to make that skin look sore and damaged. And I'm going to use the Coral Adjuster and add some of that with the Rose Adjuster to the inside. Again, using my finger, it's a pretty good paintbrush to use. And now I'm noticing at this point that it's actually quite long. I want to have a little nub on my finger, so it means that this mold goes all the way to the bottom, and this finger goes all the way to the bottom, but I can't have that because I'm going to need to cut off where my fake nub cuts off. So I'm going to trim and try and basically messily trim the finger so it's a bit shorter. I ended up trying to burn it with a lighter to melt it, but it didn't quite work, which is why it's very uniform now. So I've remelted some of my gelatin. I'm going to dip it into the gelatin and use my wax spatula to build up another fake end. I want it to be quite asymmetrical and chopped up so it doesn't look like it's cleanly cut around the center. So I'm going to use my fingers now that it's cooled down a little bit and my sponge, and just basically keep building up one side of it so it's got like a bit of hanging off meat around the edge basically. It's quite stringy and sticky as it dries, so you can really mold it around and get quite a gross texture in it. So now that's done, I'm going to powder it so it doesn't stick to itself too much. Check the length, and now that I'm happy with that, I'm going to paint the inside again. So going back in with the same colours, the Rose Adjuster to begin with. Just really messily painting it around the outside for now. And softening it with my fingers. If you put too much colour down, get your tissue and wet it with a little bit of isopropyl alcohol, or get cotton tipped with isopropyl alcohol and you can take all the colour back up. The isopropyl alcohol doesn't seem to stain the gelatin. I think only the fake bloods are what you have to be careful with for staining the gelatin, but these colours will come right back off again, at least when I did this they did. Now I'm going to go in with the blood tone, so I'm using just the blood tone from the FX palette. I'm going around the inside of the wound, mostly up, like right on the edge. And I'm going to use the aged blood, which is a little bit darker, just to add a bit more detail and variation in it, because it will be dried blood on the finger. Also, I think it's looking pretty good at this stage. So the inside is hollow, but it's not sticking down, and I want it to be very evident that's hollow. So I'm heating up my wax spatula with just the lighter and I'm putting the wax spatula inside the gelatin, which is remelting it, and then I can stick it down and it will stay permanently stuck. So you've got this real idea of this just like glove of a finger being pulled off that is empty on the inside, and I think I like that effect more. But obviously you don't have to do this, you can keep it just hollow without it being stuck down as well, whatever you prefer. Look at reference images, get an idea of what it looks like. I'm going to go back over and add a bit more of the blood tones so it doesn't look quite so pink on the inside. I'm just smearing it up towards the knuckle and making it a bit messy. And I'll also add a bit of the fake blood to the end right before I take photos of it, so it's got a wet glossy blood on the end. Yeah, so that's my video on how I try to create realistic skin tones for my Skin Illustrator on my gelatin finger, and how to make it look really hollowed out for the Degloved look. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys later. Bye!